All right, so today we talk about the dynamic ocean and shoreline processes. These are the processes that make the ocean shoreline the way that it is, and they're the reason that you enjoy the beach. So you can see there's a photo of my lovely wife hanging out on a beautiful beach. It looks like a beautiful beach. It really was. But what you don't know is that that beach is actually off of the North Atlantic Ocean on the coast of Iceland. So that water is more than a little bit cold. We did not get in the water very far that day, but it's a big, long beach. And I want you to see, you can't quite see to the other side of her, but it is a long, long beach. Um, and then you can see a head wall there on the end, that cliff that's being actively eroded. So the waves are eroding that thing and breaking it down. And there's longshore currents that we're about to discuss that are depositing all that sand into that beautiful beach. And it is such a long, long, gorgeous beach. Um, but that point out there, that's the head wall where erosion is currently being, it's the highest amount of erosion there, where that's pointing out into the ocean. So let's talk a little bit about beaches and how they form and why we like them. So the forces that act on a shoreline. Basically, a beach is just an accumulation of sediment. It's all the stuff that's ground up and deposited there. And of course, that could eventually become sandstone or something like that that we might then again look at later on when it's formed into a rock. Um, there is a tremendous amount of erosion going on the edge of the ocean. The waves are constantly eroding, transporting, depositing stuff there. And a lot of the features that you see are basically the sum results of all that erosion and deposition. So let's discuss a little bit about wave impacts and abrasion. Uh, the impacts of the waves against the ground there on the beach, uh, they can be pretty violent. They can dig away bunches of material. They can deposit bunches of material. Um, I mean, we're talking like, and each wave could hurl like literally thousands of tons of water against the land. And even you can even feel the ground rumble sometimes with big waves. If you've stood by the edge of the ocean during a huge storm, you know what I'm talking about. So the abrasion is one of the biggest, most intense parts of an ocean environment right there on the shoreline. And that's the grinding and the sawing action of all those rock fragments in the water. If you've gone underwater with a mask on in the break, the edge of the ocean, you've seen all that stuff get stirred up and shifted and ground across the bottom back and forth. And it gets broken down. So little bits of shell, little bits of sand, they all kind of grind up there. And it's the most intense place really where abrasion is acting in the ocean, is right there in that surf zone. Now, waves have a lot to do with how things are deposited. So one thing you have to kind of understand is what's known as wave refraction. And that's the bending of waves. And it does play an important part in the processes of forming the shoreline. Okay? So as a wave enters in, uh, as it reaches parts of the shoreline that project outwards, it can get bent, and that's what we call wave refraction. And this can cause certain areas to have things deposited, like sandy beaches, and other areas to get worn away. And basically, when we look at this, the energy of a wave gets concentrated against the sides and the ends of those headlands that stick out, like the picture I first showed you when we started watching this, with my wife sitting there on the beach. And then it's weakened in the back of the bay, and so that's where you get deposition. You can see that here in this picture. You get the lighthouse there on the end of that headland. That's where active erosion is happening. You can even see some little sea stacks sticking out into the ocean, which used to be part of the land there. The waves have eroded it away. And then all the material that's being deposited is down there kind of in the beach deposition zone there, in the inside interior of the bay itself. That's where material gets put down. So there's less erosion that's happening there. Okay, let's talk about longshore currents. Longshore currents are currents that travel parallel with the shore. If you spent some time out in the ocean, you may have experienced one of these. They tend to make really long beaches. So like you swim out a little ways and you're playing around in the water, and then after a little bit, you suddenly notice that you are hundreds of feet down the beach or up the beach from where the heck you started. you've been carried by a longshore current. So this really, longshore currents are capable of moving and depositing sand like far down the beach, and that's why you end up with these big long beaches with these longshore currents. So a longshore current, to better describe what I'm showing you there, looks kind of about like this. You've got the current running along the beach. Yeah, waves still come in and crash against the shore, so they would still kind of look like a regular old wave coming in. But if you went out into it, it would push you down. You would travel downwards parallel with the beach and find that you came out somewhere else. So long beaches, this is typically how they form. Now there's some erosional features that you'll see on some beaches, and I want to kind of mention a few of those. This is usually erosion on those headlands. Um, the sediment that's transported along the shore and gets deposited in areas where the energy is low will produce depositional features. Okay, so a beach is a depositional feature. But let's look at some erosional features where things get eroded away. There's a couple in particular I want to point out. The first one here is a wave-cut cliff. So wave-cut cliffs are the result from the cutting action of the surf against the base of like a coastal headland. You'll get this flat bench-like sort of wave-cut platform that forms the front of the wave-cut cliff. So if you look at those cliffs in the photo that I first showed you, they're big, tall cliffs right down to the ocean. Oftentimes there's a little platform right on the front of those. The other two things I want to mention are really cool. These are sea arches and sea stacks. These are some of my favorite structures in the ocean. Basically, as waves come in on opposite sides of a headland, they kind of eat their way in further and further until eventually they connect. And so you're left with an arch of land that goes from land over the water and then connects back down under the water again. So it's like a little tunnel you can actually go through, like a cave. They actually do start out as what we call sea caves. And then eventually when they wear their way all the way through, we call them a sea arch. Now when the top collapses off these things, you have what's called a sea stack. So they're all formed the same way. Here's a photo of me inside of a sea arch in Iceland, or no, sorry, New Zealand actually. And so that thing when the tide comes in is actually, that's water where I'm standing there on my hands. And behind me in the distance, you can see that two sea stacks sticking up. Those used to be connected to land. There used to be an arch there, but it's since collapsed and worn away. And all you're left with is the rocks jutting up, sticking like this cool little island off the coast there. So that's what a sea arch and a sea stack is. Let's turn now to spitz bars and tombolos. So these are features that can happen where you have a longshore current and sort of other currents that are interacting near the shoreline. So basically a spit is an elongated ridge of sand that sticks out from the land into the mouth of an adjacent bay. And I'm going to show you some pictures of what these things look like here in just a second. A bay mouth bar is a sandbar that totally cuts all the way across the mouth of a bay, like cutting it off from the rest of the water. And a tombolo is a ridge of sand that connects an island to the mainland or to another island. So let's take a look at a picture here, but those are the definitions for you right there. The picture will make a little more sense. So looking at the picture here in the top picture, you've got a bay, you've got a headland there, two headlands, actually three headlands, and there's a little sea stack out there that's marked on that. So it's a little bit of a rock that's left from the mainland where you had a sea arch that actually collapsed. In the second picture down, you actually have a sea arch in that picture. It's a little hard to see. It's like there's a little cave there that you could like paddle through. I've actually paddled through these in a kayak before. It's pretty cool. Then you've got a tombolo that's just out from it. So you've got some sand that's created like a little sandbar that leads from the headland all the way out to a little sea stack out there. So you've got a little, it's like connecting it outwards. A spit, you can see, is like kind of, it's almost like a partially formed bay mouth bar. So the current's moving along there from left to right, and it makes this little spit of sand that curls out there just off of the edge of the coast. In the next picture down, so the third one down, we've got a wave-cut cliff. That's where the waves have just completely eroded things back and away. And you can see those in the pictures above as well. Usually you have those in association with sea stacks and sea caves and sea arches, because as they erode back, you've got that big cliff there. In the very bottom picture there, we have, we can actually see the wave-cut platform, which is where the waves have cut away down below in the bottom of the picture. And it's, of course, got the spit in there. We've got a wave-cut cliff and a bay mouth bar that's coming all the way across that one bay there. And you can see how the longshore current would deposit those things kind of in that pattern along the coast. So longshore currents are pretty important for creating features of an ocean shoreline. Let's talk about another feature that's kind of unique. It's called a barrier island. So barrier islands are really just basically a long chain of sandbars that run parallel but don't connect with the actual coast. And they can be sometimes pretty far offshore. We actually have quite a few of these over on the East Coast. And an example of that would be all of the capes there, Cape Hatteras, Cape Lookout, all along the edge there of North Carolina. So maybe some of you guys have been out to the barrier islands in North Carolina, and it's a great place to go vacation. It's a very fancy place if you're going to live out in any of those locations. But you can see there where they're a good ways off of the actual coast, and these things can be large. I mean, they're bigger than just a sandbar. Like some of these things you could actually have houses on. We build roads and highways down them. So they're kind of large structures, barrier islands are. And they do protect the inner, what we call the inner sound, the water that's calmer inside of them from big waves and things like that. So it can be kind of calm there in the sound. And then as you go out past the actual barrier islands, it becomes more open ocean, a little bit more wave action going on. So what do we do if we don't want our shoreline to disappear from us? There's a number of things humans do to try and protect their shorelines. If you've ever been anywhere along the edge of an ocean or lived along the edge of an ocean, you've probably seen a lot of these structures. So let's name a few of them and take a look. As far as protection goes, we have things like breakwaters and seawalls. These are basically just some man-made structure that protects the edge of the land from any waves from eating it away. They can keep erosion from happening. So sometimes they're metal, sometimes they're rock, sometimes they're concrete. There's lots of ways to build a seawall or a breakwater. A groin is a little bit different. I don't have a picture of a groin, but groins are kind of unique. You can build a groin so that sand purposely gets deposited and you make a beach in a specific spot. And sometimes we'll build groins even in rivers to control the flow of a river. What they are a little jutty of land that we kind of build outwards from the water, and we can face that, kind of angle it into the current or away from the current if we want to make an attracting or a repelling groin, or we can angle it straight out at a right angle. And depending on how you angle that thing, you will create a sandbar in one place and a cut bank on the other side of the river. And you can do that on a longshore current too. And you can see these, if you've ever been down a beach, you'll see these things sticking out into the water, just as like somebody built a pier out that just was like blocking the water for no reason. The reason for that is to make a groin, to try and create deposition in one spot and erosion in another. Another thing that we do is called beach nourishment. This is a weird one. When a huge storm system comes in and wipes out a beach, this happened in Cancun one time right before I visited, and a lot of the big hotels that were there on the beach actually fell into the ocean because the waves ate the foundations away. They had no beach, and that's their whole livelihood there. Like that's the whole tourism thing in Cancun is the beach. Well, if you go to the beach now, it's not the original beach. What they did was they took barges out in the ocean, a little ways offshore. They dropped down hoses, and they sucked the sand off the bottom of the ocean, and they drove it back in and dumped it on what was now the beach. And so the beach in Cancun, if you've ever been there, is not the original beach. We made that. We nourished it back to life, if you will. Here's a photo of what we did here in Miami. It's the exact same thing. You've got the Miami beach after a big storm system. There's no sand. It's like completely eroded away. Some hotels there with some breakwaters. You can actually see some groins jutting out there. And afterwards, in the bottom picture, look at all the sand we drug in. That's not natural. We just kind of scooped it up and brought it in and dropped it off. And so there's a lot of things we can do to try and keep the beach intact. And that's it for today.